Howdy, friends. Thank you for listening to the Roundup Podcast. In this season of the podcast, you will hear breakout audio from Roundup 2024. If you have any questions related to the content, send them to sbtccollegiate@sbtexas.com. Don't forget, follow us on social media at sbtccollegiate. Now, enjoy the podcast.
All right, so just to lay out our time, and there's one more handout. We had bigger groups than they planned for, so if anybody wants a handout, there you go. So I'm going to kind of just walk through like a little bit of why this concept is hard, kind of diagnose some of the reasons it's hard, and then walk through, I taught journalism at TCU, so who, what, when, where, why. Those are the good journalism questions of how we might pursue a remedy for it. So that's our layout for this morning. So it starts with this. We all know that this idea of community, or the Bible calls it koinonia, or fellowship, or this kind of stuff, we know it's important. We know it's right. We believe it theoretically. We believe it theologically. But it's really hard. Is it hard on your campus? Is it hard in your ministry? What makes it hard? How would you answer this question as why is it hard?
People.
Sin and brokenness in the world. Yeah. People. Because turns out there's all sorts of views on it. Turns out there's all sorts of things vying for our attention, and truly sin and brokenness in the world. Anything more specific than people that make it hard?
I'd say like my campus, so like we're 55% commuters. So
Yeah.
people just kind of like go to campus,
Mm-hmm.
go to class. leave.
Yeah.
So I was at the Breakout, which was like reaching commuters.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of nice because like these two kind of tie into each other, but
Or they might immediately oppose each other, one of the two.
maybe.
So we'll see.
Fun ride.
Cool. Yeah, that's a very real, just some of the logistics of it. Yeah.
I'd say busyness or priority.
Busyness or priorities. Yeah.
We want community, but there are other things that we think.
Yes. We want it on our terms until it inconveniences us.
Exactly.
Yeah. That's good. We'll come back to that. Yeah.
See, like the loudest and the brightest things come from like the bars and the frat houses.
Mm-hmm. So there's all sorts of things pulling us away from this. Yeah. That's good. And there's plenty of others. I want to submit that universally there's a few in addition to, or that kind of summarize some of what you said. The first is this: community means different things to different people. Have you experienced this? This term, it's kind of vague. We use it a lot in churchy worlds kind of stuff. But if I were to ask you, what does community mean? We might sort of be in the same realm, but you might answer different than him, than her. We would have a different answer. And to a very real sense, this term community can mean everything or nothing. Same thing, like discipleship can mean everything or nothing. Gospel can mean 1,000 different things. And so some of these words we use, it's hard to get to what we're aiming at because we don't even really know what it is we're aiming at. So outside of a Christian definition, what are some things that get labeled as community? Like outside of what God calls us people to, and what do you even see on your campus or in your city? What are some things that get labeled as community? Affinity groups. Yeah. Say it again. Neighborhoods. Yeah.
A group of people with similar interests.
Yeah. So yeah, people who love this movie series, or people who have joined this Facebook group, or have this kind of pet, or this kind of stuff. And like that's the affinity piece. Like we're a community because we all love soccer together. Or I love that you said like neighborhoods. I would bet that if there's a dorm, if you have more of a residential campus or a neighboring apartment building or that kind of stuff, whenever it's being built, there'll be some advertisement that says something like, come feel the warmth of community. Come experience true community. And you're like, I want that. Because it is like, it's this felt need we all have, but you know as well as I do, like you can share 4 walls and a ceiling with someone and never once run into them. And so it's this pipe dream promise that's like, because you live here, you'll know everyone. Right? And so it's neighborhoods, it's affinity. Sometimes it's around needs. Like we come together to either meet or receive different needs. Like you're in a different season, a specific season. You're at this school that you're at for a season. Most of you probably had someone write in your graduating high school yearbook, we'll be best friends forever. And you've not spoken to that person since. Because turns out the only reason you were friends is because there weren't that many of you in the small town you grew up in, and that season's over and you found better friends. And that's not how you're supposed to say it, but let's be honest, sometimes it's what happens. And so you're together for a season, you've got this need or you're walking through something, but then that season ends. And if that's all community is, we're settling for something very low bar. Like if your interest changes, you don't like soccer anymore, you have no reason to belong to that community anymore. You move out of the dorm that promised you the warmth of community. Well, you're not part of that community anymore. You graduate, you move on. And And then let's be honest too, there's something that happens in some of us that go, well, the cost of the commitment isn't worth the benefit. That happened to anyone? I know you're not supposed to talk about that, but either if we don't feel it, people in our group feel it, right? I know I've got to do this thing tonight. People are coming over. I'm the leader, so I've got to say, hey, welcome. So glad you're here. How quickly can I get you out? Right? There's a limit to our ability to engage. Do you feel some of this tension? Like, it can mean everything. It can mean nothing. And so if it's the cost benefit, the kind of take or leave it, and some of this is because of some of the distraction around us or everything pulling us away, would you say the brightest and loudest kind of stuff? Community is probably not the brightest and loudest. And so if I can take or leave community, that's kind of one end of the spectrum of what it can mean. Take it, leave it. If it benefits me, sure. If it costs me too much, I'm out. Do you have people like that? You don't have to raise your hand, but do you have people like that in your ministry or campus group or church? Is it you? We all have that feeling sometimes. The other end of the spectrum is community means you and I are best friends till we die. And both of those can be really hard and really disjointed. We had a couple who left our church a few years ago because their view of community was we're best friends for life. Drop of a hat. I'm for you. You're for me. It's a really beautiful image until they posted at 1 a.m. on our church's like kind of internal social media group. 1 a.m. I'll remind you. 1 a.m. Can someone come to our house? We've got to go to the hospital with one of our kids. We need someone to watch the other kids. No one responded. Why? 1 a.m. People started to respond like 6 or 7 the next morning, that kind of stuff. But they were so pissed that no one came to their rescue at 1:02 a.m. that they were like, y'all talk about family, you talk about community. I guess you don't actually believe it. And they left. Now, there's a lot that's wrong with that. And we talked through it, that kind of stuff. But there's some version of that people in our quote unquote groups or ministries or that kind of stuff feel that we will never be able to meet their expectation. Is that fair? So community can mean everything and nothing. It's one of the reasons that it's hard. A second reason it's hard is that Christians can have unrealistic or unattainable expectations. So that family that I just mentioned, they had an unrealistic, unattainable expectation of what community could be for them. I hope that as you think about your community, God will stir a love in it, in you, for the actual people that God has put in your life. But my fear and my experience is that a lot of folks, even well-meaning Christian folks, have this idea of community that we really want, and it's not what we're seeing with the people in front of us. And so we downplay what we have to try to get what we actually want. And I wonder if that's a lie from the enemy to tell us there's always bigger, there's always better, there's always deeper, there's always more. Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who was writing, he wrote this before World War II. He wrote a book called Life Together. And I love his take on community. And I'm going to read it. He says, those who love their dream of a Christian community more than they love their Christian community itself become destroyers of Christian community. Can I say that again?
Yeah.
Those who love their dream of a Christian community more than they love their literal Christian community itself become destroyers of Christian community. And man, and there's so many books on community. Even like there's a session like this could run the risk of painting this really rainbows and unicorns, rosy pictures of like, here's how the silver bullet, 100% guaranteed, you have best friends kind of stuff. Like that's just not real. And I love Bonhoeffer's admission because it cuts to the heart of a lot of us. If we'd rather have some hypothetical community than the actual community that God's put in front of us. But you guys, like, however messy you are and the people are, because what's the problem with community? It's the people. however broken it is, whoever God has given you in this season, like those are actual people created by God in His image for you to walk with and pursue Jesus with. And no matter what you think of them, no matter what they think of you, the actual community is far better than this idealized but fake hypothetical community that we can create in our mind. Does that make sense? Plus, let me add something to this. And this is why I love a lot of your ministries, I assume, have groups or triads or home groups or small groups or You can fill in the blank on whatever you call those things, right? One of the things that we do as we lead ministries or as we lead churches is we call people to an unattainable level of community. You want me to check and see if it's working? That's great. It is still working. Y'all, that's Sarah. Sarah told me she was going to check and make sure that we're recording. So y'all give Sarah a hand. Look at that rousing applause for you, Sarah. Where were we? Oh, we can put unrealistic expectations on folks to go like, hey, if you're part of this ministry, you have to know everybody in this ministry. If you're part of this group, you have to be very good friends with everyone. This becomes your only family on campus kind of stuff. Now, there's some situations where that is appropriate and good. There's some situations where that is idealistic and not helpful. We tell our church this all the time, and we told college students this all the time when we were doing campus ministry. The Christian life is not designed to be lived alone. You believe that? I believe you believe that because you chose to come into this room for this session. We also tell them, though, the Christian life is not designed to be lived with several dozen or several hundred people in a room. So what you're doing this week is amazing. It's great. It's equipping. It's inspiring, this kind of stuff. But if this is the primary way that we interact is with several hundred of us in a room, like we're just as alone as if we were trying to pursue the Christian walk by ourselves. You agree with that? And yet sometimes we're like, there's 150 of us in this ministry. We all have to be friends and carry each other's burdens and this kind of stuff, right? Has that been your experience? We have to know everybody here. There's a pastor that I knew one time who said he was going to have dinner, no matter how big his church got, he was going to have dinner with everyone in his church every year, once a year, which is great until his church gets bigger than 365 or 366 on the fourth year. But also, like, there's a lot that happens between March 1st, 2023 and March 1st, 2024. And again, the fear in that is you're creating a vision for community that is very, like, imitation false of what God actually calls people to. Like, what are some things God calls his people to? Depth, knownness. There's all these commands in the Bible that are summarized as one another commands. What are some of the one another commands?
Love one another.
Love one another. Can you love 150, 200, 1,500 people well?
No.
You can't even know them well enough to know if you love them or not. Right? What are some others? That's the only one. There's actually 100 of them. Forgive one another. Thank you for saying that. That's the one no one wants to talk about. That may be the hardest one.
That's fine. That's you, actually.
Oh, I love it. That's awesome. Yeah, forgive one another. What do you have to have experienced with someone in order to forgive them? Conflict, and one of you has to have sinned against the other. That takes close proximity. So again, you can't do it. You can't forgive one another if you're trying to pursue Christian life alone. But if you have these super surfacey, several dozen, several hundred people, right? Like you don't know each other well enough to sin against one another, by and large, right? What are some other one another commands? Pray for one another. Yeah. Can you pray? I'm going to say this carefully. Can you pray meaningfully for several dozen, several hundred people on a regular basis?
Not in detail.
Perhaps in some context, but yeah, not in detail. And so again, by trying to call people to this unattainable view of community, on some level, we as leaders dumb down what community actually is. It's interesting to see Jesus and then also him first, but then also like sociologists, psychologists talk about different realms of relationships. Some of y'all know this very well. I'm going to race through it. But there's this like social circle of relationship. If you're taking notes, the circle is down there at the bottom. I don't know why I got moved to the bottom, but it's down there. You can, in general, okay, this is an average. Some of you are like, I'm way more relationally capable than this. Some of you are like, I'd rather take this away and just know one person. But on average, we can have kind of general social relationships, acquaintances, if you will, with about 120 to 150 people. Okay, this is the small talk relationships. Like you recognize each other in a big room, and I know your name starts with a J, but it's either Jim or John, so I'm going to call you bro instead. Like you know each other, but you don't know each other. Okay, most of us have a capacity for carrying that kind of relationship on with about 120, 150 people. Next level in is a social relationship. Okay, casual relationships. This is a step in, like you're maybe doing activities with this person. Your paths cross more than once a week. You definitely know if it's Jim or John, that kind of stuff. So it's a closer relationship. But can you bear the burdens of 50 or 70 people? Can you pray meaningfully and deeply for 50 or 70 people? Again, we're getting closer, but largely outside of some of us who have a unique capacity and gifting, which praise God that some of us do, that's still a lot of people to try to walk with, right? And so when we're talking about this idea of community, we've got to narrow in and set our expectations, which I hope is freeing for you to go, God's not wired me like this, so it's okay if I can't. Because true community, this image, genuine community, starts to form around this close set of relationships. The 12, the 15. How many did Jesus walk with during most of his ministry? Who did he spend most time with? He taught this many. This many kind of followed and went with him. He spent a whole lot of time with the 12, and you see where we're going next. But the close folks, like these are the folks that you're going to call when life sucks. These are the folks that you feel needs for, and you can fulfill their needs. Some of our actual families fit into this. Start using family language. I know that's sensitive for some folks. So sometimes actual families fit into this kind of relationship. But even still, like Jesus spent most time with Peter, James, and John. And so there's this intimate, this level of depth. Like this is you're never going to let me down. I'm never going to let you down. I can share my most intimate secrets with you without fear of being betrayed. We all need some of those in our lives, but if we try to treat these people like this, hi, I'm Ben. Can I tell you my deepest, darkest secret and sin? Hi, I'm Ben. Can I tell you my secret? There's an awareness of what this circle can achieve in the Christian life, and if we don't kind of rightly define the kind of relationship, define the relationship, if you will, then we're trying to call people, or we're trying to live out something that God didn't design us for. The burden is too great. Does that make sense? Yeah. So when Christians talk about community, what size do we mean? It's going to be probably somewhere in here that you can be in true, deep relationship with. And again, I hope that's free. It doesn't mean you can't know or help others connect to other smaller pockets of community, but God didn't design us to carry every relationship we've ever had equally. All right, so third disclaimer, third diagnosis of why community is hard is based on the first two. If community means different things to different people, if we can have unrealistic and unattainable expectations, then part of the diagnosis, the core of this, is that the image that the Bible uses for his people is not primarily the term we use, which is community. You know that? We use this term all the time. But when God talks about his church, when God talks about his people in the Bible, he uses two other terms almost exclusively. You know what the terms or the images are? He calls them all sorts of family imagery. You know what our primary relationship is, even though I've never met most of you?
Brother or sister.
Yeah, we're sister and brother in Christ together. We're all siblings together, daughters and sons of a good father and co-heirs with him, and we've been grafted in and adopted, and it's all this language. That's the primary term that God uses for his people. And I wonder if by calling people to community, we're settling for something less because of all the other swirling uses of that term. And I wonder if some of this is going, what if we call people to a deeper relationship, something like a spiritual family? And that's the most new age term I know, but I couldn't find a better one. But that's what God calls us to be. We're a spiritual family. In the spirit, we are a family together, unified by one spirit, one Christ, one blood, one death, right? You know what the second most common image in the Bible is for God's people?
A nation.
The nation's there. Yeah, priesthood, nation, that's there. It's body imagery. So Romans 12, 1 Corinthians 12, you have gifts that I don't have. I need your gifts. You have parts. You're a part of the body. I'm a part of the body. I don't even get to look at you and say, I don't need your part of the body, right? That kind of stuff. Ephesians 4 talks about how we grow up into Christ, who's the head. You know what he says? It's by speaking the truth in love, one with another. And so this image of body, of family, that's the core remedy is I think we call people to less than what God calls us to, because this convoluted, vague term of community. And so for the rest of the time, I want to go, what would it look like to call people to something deeper, something like a spiritual family? Yeah.
I was curious if you think that we moved away from the terms of family kind of because of the break-off of Catholicism, but also the misconstrued statements that a lot of the world doesn't understand when we say brother and sister, especially when there's a married couple in the family.
Yeah, it is certainly that. I mean, household of faith is another one that, when you talk about like your spiritual household, like in Western societies, at least, we have a hard time picturing family or households beyond our nuclear family. In a lot of Eastern societies still, and in some Western society, but majority Eastern societies, there's still this image of like, when you get married, you move into the broader family. And so the image carries even more where Christianity started than some of the images we have. The brokenness in nuclear families is another factor in why we've moved away from this. Because I'm going to guess, and again, I want to be sensitive here, when I say the term family, in a room this size, there's something negative that triggers. And so we've moved away from some of it, perhaps with really well-meaning intention. But in doing so, we've lost some of the depth and beauty of what the Bible calls God's people. It's a great question. Any other questions before we move on to those are the diagnoses, before we move on to remedies? Okay, so the theme of all of these is what would it look like to call God's people to be a family together, a spiritual family together. So again, who, what, when, where, why. Who are we talking about? We spent a lot of time on this already, so I'm not going to belabor the point. But it's the number of people that you can live out some of these one another commands with. Okay? It's an interesting thing. If part of God's call on us is to bear each other's burdens, then if I don't know you well enough to know what your burdens are, I'm disallowing myself and you from living out part of your Christian calling. If you don't feel comfortable enough with me to share some of your burdens with me, then you're disallowing me from living out part of my reality of discipleship. That makes sense? And so again, please don't hear, I'm not trying to do away with larger gatherings or what. I'd be really passive aggressive if I was like, y'all should never do a conference. It's stupid. That's not what I'm saying. But what I am saying is like the discipleship, consistency, relationship, the design that God has for his people is to live in this relationship where you can live out the one another's. Okay, there's a woman in our church who has this seemingly endless relational capacity. Like she would look at this and be like, I can have deep and meaningful relationships with 120 people. And she is right. Like a lot of folks are like, teach me your way. But if she was the bar, then all of the rest of us are going to fail. Like she is uniquely gifted by God for that relational capacity. Most of us can have intentional burden bearing one another. Let me get close to you such that I can sin against you, and we have to work through forgiveness. Like we can have those kind of relationships with max of 12 or 15. Make sense? So we're talking about the who. It's the number of people that we can kind of really go deep in one another with. So that's the who. What do we do as a spiritual family? Let me ask you this. If you have some degree of health in your nuclear family, and again, no nuclear family is perfect, but if you have a generally healthy picture of a family, what are some things that your family does together? Eat together. What else? Spend time. Yeah, sometimes non-planned time even.
Enjoy that time.
Enjoy that time sometimes. And also sometimes you don't enjoy that time together. And that's okay as well. Chores. Yeah, you serve together. You serve each other. Sometimes begrudgingly.
Well, and
talk about how life is going. Yeah, you share things with each other.
Yell at each other.
Yell at each other. Yes. And thank you for that. Because sometimes like there is, again, I don't want to paint the rainbows and unicorns version of community. Like, part of the Bible's call is to rebuke one another and to exhort one another, which often gets put in with encouragement. But exhortation is like, I see something you're doing that is maybe unwise. I'm going to exhort you to change your ways, kind of stuff.
We seek to regain like a relationship with them if that's something that we failed to do.
Yeah. Yeah, so there is a forgiveness restoration, hopefully, God willing, not every time, but that can be possible there. And on we can go, right? Like there's all these images that we can have of our actual or a actual kind of healthy family: fun, eat, play, discipline, truth, speak truth in love, chip in, grieve, like all these things. Guess what a lot of God's calling on his spiritual family is. It's a lot of that same stuff. It's a lot of that same stuff. And so I want to submit that a lot of what a spiritual family does is pursues holistic discipleship. And all I'm trying to do with this phrase is broaden our terms for what most of our groups, I'm assuming, end up doing. And when I say holistic, what I mean is like there's this upward element to our discipleship, inward and outward. There's this knowledge of God element to what we try to foster. There's this affection, heart, communal one anotherness that happens there. And then there's a living out of our faith as well. If you think that holistic sounds, again, too new agey, I would just submit this is another way of saying that God calls us to love him with our heart, soul, mind, and strength. And so there's a heart level and a soul's whatever, the whole being, mind, and then strength. Like God calls us to be formed into all of these aspects, right? Here's what we tell our leaders in our church all the time. Your group, if you don't plan well, and if you're the only leader, it's going to drift toward the bent of its leader. Make sense? So, for those, especially like, let's make it real time. Like, let's say you didn't have a ton of time to plan for your group because finals are coming up or this kind of stuff. But your group's going to meet. What are you naturally going to do with the group? Whatever your passion is, whatever you don't have to prep for, whatever kind of your gifting comes out because it's easiest for you, right? So, those of us who trend more toward like Bible study, head knowledge, let's dig into the scriptures. If we're not planning, if we're not intentional, if we're the only leader, what's our group going to trend toward?
Jumping into the scriptures.
Jumping into the scriptures, right? It's going to move more toward head at the expense of some of these other things. If we're all about like, oh man, relationships, and we love this idea of community. And again, you're in the room, so you're not at neutral anymore. We're going to have our 4th game night in a row. You know why? Because it's really fun. And then we're going to pray for each other a whole lot. All those things are great for the record. But if we trend that way at the ignorance, I'll use that word intentionally, ignorance of some of these other things, right? Or we're just always out, always trying to be among non-believers, always trying to serve and seek justice. Again, great things. But if it's not this balance or tension, depending on how it feels sometimes, then it'd be not dissimilar to going to a gym and only working out torso and back, or only working out arms, or only working out legs. Does that make sense? Heart, soul, mind, and strength, up and in and out. Like God calls us to form the head and the heart, and then to see that overflow into our hands. So what does a spiritual family do? You're practicing holistic formation together. I would guess if we went around the room, you go, I'm bent either at one of these points or on one of the sides at the expense of the third point or the other 2 sides. Is that fair? What does that mean? It means that you're naturally gifted, and praise God that he's gifted different parts of the body in these certain ways. He's gifted you to foster some elements of discipleship, but probably not others. And so it's either like learn and get going and fake it till you make it, or is there someone else in your group who is really gifted? If you're not the prayer person who's always reminding you, hey, we got 10 minutes, we got to pray. Man, just give that person the freedom to go first instead of waiting until the last 10 minutes or that kind of thing. Does this make sense? Like what a spiritual family practices together is this more holistic form of discipleship. Again, back to being the body. Everyone in your group is given to you with some gifts. Even if they're a brand new believer, they have some gifts that you don't. Like it's part of the whole like mystery of the spiritual gifts is you may have been walking with Jesus for a long time, but nobody but Jesus is going to be perfectly formed in the image of God. And so we need one another, helping each other grow up in ways that we're weak. I would submit the ways that I've grown most, I've been a pastor for 25 years. The ways that I've grown most in my personal walk have been when I've been in relationship with people who are different from me, noticing blind spots in my life, and gently pointing them out. If they point them out harshly, I don't want to hear them. I don't ever want to hear them, but would you agree with that? Like, if you think about the times you've grown most, I'm going to guess there's relationship involved and maybe some sort of hardship involved. Is that fair? Yeah.
I think too, with regards to like American culture, even just secularism, it's we've been so exposed to this idea that quantity over quality.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that it's one thing to say, okay, how many times can I pray, or how many times I can pray with true intention and heart.
They're different questions.
And like, it's like you said, it's good. I like what you said, because you said it's good that you're engaging in these things and you're wanting to do them with people.
Yeah.
But where, where's that balance of quality with quantity?
Yeah.
And I think especially when it comes to community, so like in my college experience, we have like overflow and we have BSM. We have a bunch of, and they have like 100 people going to there, whereas our community has like, maybe at a regular big meeting night, it's like 30 people. But what's so interesting is I've had people coming from those other organizations saying it's way too cliquey over at these other, like I can't seem to find a group to fit in, even though there's so many groups and they all have their backs turned and they're so caught up with whatever dramas.
Sure. Yeah.
And we at least try with our community, even though we have a small gathering, that anybody that's new that's walking into the building, like it is the very first intention to treat them with the most uprightness and invitation.
Yeah, because you're modeling for them.
There's something really nice, like I think, and even our minister will say this, is like it's so much better to have a small quality group of people rather than too many people where you can't connect.
Yeah, bigger, better, faster, stronger is not always evil, but is much more a product of our culture and context than what you see in even still in a lot of the Eastern world, but especially in the first century Eastern world where Christianity started. So I think you're right. So it takes this level of depth, takes this level of relationship to get to this point, which leads us to the third thing. When is this kind of relationship cultivated? It's going to be cultivated in everyday life more than it is in programs. To be cultivated in everyday life more than it is in programs. And again, like if you picture the places and spaces and relationships that you've grown most in, don't want to throw programs out. And yet also, like, when what I just shared is true. When the people who have been closest to me have seen my blind spots more often, it's not in the 1 hour that we're sitting around a Bible going, what do you think Luke meant in Acts 12:42? I don't know if that's a verse. We can theorize about that and talk about it, and maybe something comes up. But it's the fact that Camp and Kathy are two neighbors who live 3 doors down from us. We have kids in the same grades, and so we walk to school with them every day. They're part of our church. They know us. We're in community together, so we do the programming stuff together. But a lot more of the, where they're seeing my blind spots or where they're helping form my heart kind of stuff is when they go, hey, Camp will pull me aside, only a couple times, and go, I've noticed this tone that you have with, I'm going to make a kid up, my middle one. I've noticed this tone you have with your middle kid 2 or 3 times over the last month as you're walking to school. And we know everybody's trying to get out the door and nobody's shoes are tied and this kind of stuff, but I've noticed this in you. Is there anything to press into there? It's like, man, yeah, maybe. Do you have those kind of relationships? You have those kind of microcosm pieces of that's probably not going to come out when we're sitting around a Bible study. It's certainly not going to come out if I'm sitting in an auditorium with a stage, unless my middle child's there and I'm angry at her then. It's those kind of relationships that are in the everyday life that we see some aspects of our need and some aspects of our relationship. That make sense? That's part of why I said at the beginning, I love the intersection of college, university, ministry, and community. It's because there is a really unique space, and not everybody has this. Even on some non-commuter campuses, you still have this, though, of everybody's kind of in the same stage. Everybody's moving in generally the same direction, and so some of the desires are at least vaguely similar. Some of the purpose of being together around education and moving toward career and that kind of stuff is vaguely similar. There's an ability to walk in some degree of everyday lifeness with others in this specific life stage that gets really hard out of this specific life stage. I've known folks who have moved away from their college town and moved back because they had this amazing, great college experience, and turns out it's not the same. Because all of life isn't wrapped around the same direction and this kind of stuff. And so I hope there's something in this that goes, let's not do away with the programming sort of things, but how do we equip people to look in the everyday stuff of life and see some of what's going on that's not going to come out in just the Bible study, or not going to come out in just the mission. We ask every one of our groups in our church to have a board game night at least once a semester. Because what you see on a board game night that you don't see on a Bible study night is people who think they're the best at a game, and what happens in their hearts and minds and souls when they realize they're not the best in the game, and their response to the person who is better than them. Like, that's not going to come up when you're like, what do you think Paul means when he says compassion? Like, it's like, you look really angry right now. And there's this competitiveness and this pride and this kind of stuff. And so guess what? Is that a formal church function? No, but is it a moment where discipleship needs are revealed? Yeah.
Wait, are you saying that people shouldn't flip the Monopoly?
Sometimes people shouldn't flip the Monopoly table. Yeah. Sometimes. There's only one, let me see if you know this. There's only one place where competition is commended in the Bible. You know what it is? You know what verse? Outdo one another in showing honor, which is ironically outdo one another in being most humble toward each, like outdo one another in celebrating other people's wins. So it's like a weird reversal of competition. Be the best at celebrating other people. So it's the one place in the Bible that, anyway. But that's like seeing people's hearts, or the overflow, if we can go back a couple of slides, the overflow of what's going on, like, isn't always going to come out in the programmed environments. And so a lot of the discipleship happens in the everyday stuff of life. Acts 2, Luke gives a little bit of an image of what the early church did and how they participated. So they devoted themselves, we know these verses, to the apostles' teaching and the fellowship, to the breaking of bread and the prayers. And awe came upon every soul, and many signs and wonders were being done through the apostles. And all who believed were together every Sunday morning and Wednesday night, and they had all things in common. Did you read that? And they were selling their possessions and belongings and distributing the proceeds as any had need. And on Sunday mornings and Wednesday nights, they attended the temple together and broke bread in their homes. And I'm being silly with this, but like, this is not the image of church that we have today. Like, they were together day by day. They had this all in for each other. They were together all the time, it seems like. And what were they doing? They were practicing the elements of that up, in, and out discipleship. They were talking about the apostles' teaching together, and they were worshiping together and selling, taking care of each other, and this kind of stuff. There's mission in this passage, but we don't teach it this way. Them going to the temple and then breaking bread in homes. In most of our circles, I'm guessing you've been taught that they went to the church on Sunday and then they went to small groups. Jesus was not being worshipped at the temple in Jerusalem. They were not singing praise songs and hearing a sermon. You know what was happening at the temple? Who was worshiping at the temple? Jews were. So why would God's people go to where Jewish worship was happening? It's where their friends, neighbors, and family members who were still Jewish and non-believing were gathered. And so them going to the temple was not going to big church. Them going to the temple was an act of mission. You know the only passive thing in this whole thing is? It's that God added to their number daily those who are being saved. What was the church doing? They were just living out faithful discipleship. And then God blessed it, and God brought more people to them. And it's kind of a side comment, but I wonder if that's a reversal of how some of our ministries think, where we think we need to add daily to the number that God would save. And so we do some of these other things. This is just faithful family, living as family, doing what God calls his people to do, and God brought the growth. I hope that's freeing for some of us. Ours is not to provide the growth. Ours is to faithfully live out discipleship. But there's one word that either unlocks or blocks this from happening. You know what the word is? So they devoted themselves to these things. And this is what makes community really hard, especially in university college settings. What makes this depth of a relationship and spiritual family relationship really hard. There are so many things calling you and calling your friends and your peers and those who you're supposed to be discipling, all this kind of, there's so many things saying, devote yourself to me. It's the biggest and loudest and flashiest. It's this group claims your devotion. This person claims your devotion. This goal claims your devotion. And it just fogs and muddies the waters and this kind of stuff. And I mean, does it take some devotion to be committed to your nuclear family? Yeah. Is it hard sometimes? Yeah. Do you have to remember to text your mom on Mother's Day? Yeah, sometimes someone needs to remind you of that, hypothetically. Like there's some level of devotion, though, that goes, hey, this is going to last more than a season, more than a time I live in this neighborhood or apartment building, more than this affinity. There's something that unites us that is deeper. And there's no better thing to devote yourself to other than God and his people and his mission. Make sense? That's why this everyday, more than just programs, matters so deeply. All right, so if day-by-day discipleship sounds hard, let's make it even harder. Where does it take place? It is only going to take place when we let people into our areas of need and when we let people into our areas of messiness. Again, what parts of you need to grow up in Christ? Not the parts that are already being well formed in Christ. It's the parts that are not that, the messy parts, the broken parts. Like that's, Jesus came to seek and save the lost. The doctor doesn't, or the sick doesn't need a doctor, but it's the well doesn't, the healthy don't need a doctor, but the sick do. And so like Jesus wants to meet us in the areas of mess and brokenness and this kind of stuff. But man, we are taught by everything around us, and if we're honest, everything inside of us, not to let people into the mess and the need, right? This is from an old show called Everybody Loves Raymond. It was on before most of you were born. Did y'all watch Everybody Loves Raymond? This is ageism, and I recognize that, but I'm assuming we're the only people in the room who watched it. You can probably find it on TBS. Raymond and his family all live in a block together, and the whole theme of the show is family's hard and beautiful. There it is. Now I don't have to watch it. But this one episode, Ray's parents get this new couch. And his mom won't take the shrink wrap off the couch. Won't take the plastic wrapping off the couch. Why would someone not take the plastic wrapping and shrink wrap off the couch? Don't want to get the couch dirty. What is the one purpose that a couch serves?
To sit on.
To sit on, maybe lay on, to be comfortable, not to make out on, to be clear. It's not what a couch is for. To be comfortable on. You know, it will disallow, the one thing maybe that will disallow a couch from being super comfortable? Never turning the shrink wrap, never pulling the shrink wrap off. And it's such a silly image. I saw this episode before I was a believer, but it stuck with me for all these years. It's like, this is how Christians are taught to live. Like, put on the shrink wrap, look pretty, look like we have it all together. If something spills on us, follow the metaphor, like we can just wipe it off. It's not actually going to impact us, kind of stuff. If that's the case, we will never grow up in Christ because we're not being honest with ourselves. And again, that whole bear each other's burdens. You're gifted in areas I'm not. I have blind spots that I need you to see because turns out they're blind spots. Like, if we can't take the shrink wrap off our lives, we're not going to grow up into Christ, who's the head. Discipleship happens in our areas of need and mess. And nobody's going to want to go first. So if you're leading a group, leading a ministry, leading a church, modeling this kind of stuff, guess where it's got to start? Without being guilt trippy at all, as goes the leader, so goes the organization. And so we've got to be the first to unwrap the couch, if you will. Fair? All right. Who, what, when, where, and then last question is why. I'll ask you, why does this conversation matter? Why is this degree of relationship and this view of discipleship matter? Why did you come into this room? Why do you care about it?
Christianity is all relationship.
Christianity is all relationship. Love God and love others. That's a great reason. Why else?
We literally cannot grow without learning from the people before us.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. We need one another. It's a theme through Scripture. And everything in our culture tells us you have what it takes. You do you. Individualism, we can rail against it, but you know it's true, right? That is not a Christian message. The Christian message is you don't have what it takes. You can't do it on your own. I did it for you. That's what Jesus did for us. And then I sent my Spirit to walk with you, and part of the ways that you grow is putting you in the context of community. This is a tide that we have to fight so hard, but it's so beautiful. A little theology for you. Part of why this conversation matters is this conversation we're having, this is who God designed his people to be. Every one of us is created in his image, but none of us, because of sin and brokenness, are fully showing off the image of God. And so we need each other. And if I could take it a step further, this isn't up here. This is who God designed his people to be, but it is who God designed his people to be because it is a reflection of who God himself is. Right? Like, the 3-in-1 nature of God says there is one God, perfect in unity, and yet distinct in different roles and that kind of stuff. Like, this fight for unity, this fight for family. Like, is everyone in your family exactly the same as each other? No. Is it hard to get along with some people in your family sometimes? You don't have to answer that. It isn't my family, though. Unity is not uniformity. The goal isn't for everyone to look exactly like each other or act exactly like each other or forget our backstories or our heritages or this kind of stuff. But when Jew and Gentile and slave and free and male and female came together in the scriptures, they didn't just all of a sudden start looking the same, but rather as a unified family, they fought against their differences and they celebrated each other's differences, and they came together because there was something deeper that united them. So God designed us to be this because that's who God is. And then second, more than it is just something our church or ministry tells people they should do, this level of relationship is an act of sacrifice and humility and worship, because it asks us to deny all the other things that claim to give us our identity and all the other things maybe sometimes we prefer, and lay down our lives for Jesus, who laid down his life for us first, but also to lay down our lives for each other. Make sense? Okay. I want to give just a couple minutes for Q&A. I know you got to go to lunch here in a sec. In the middle of the back page, part of my goal for this is that you can take it and make it tangible. And so there's a couple of questions for you, whether you're a group leader, ministry leader, church leader, whatever else. Are there ways that you can immediately take this and make it somewhat tangible? Are there shifts that you need to make in your ministry? Maybe it's your view of community. Maybe it's the way you carry it out, this kind of stuff. Any questions as we wrap up? Thoughts? Rebukes? I'm fine with that. It's part of one another commands. Rebuke one another in their folly. Yeah.
I wrote it down. Okay. How do you find the balance between, like, when community tends towards like people forming bad cliques, like really looking inward toward the close and intimate? Yeah. And then like spreading yourself way too thin.
Yeah, yeah. So the bad clique, I like that term. It's a illegitimate form of this kind of relationship, right? And so on some level, it's going to be, it might look this healthy or unhealthy. It might look the same from the outside, but it's going to be digging in the content and the actual relationships and going, is this a healthy clique? Even though it's not a term we like to use. But I have to think, like, do you ever think the other disciples were like, why do Peter, James, and John get to go over there? You know they do, because they were jealous of each other all the time. So one thing you know about the apostles in the scriptures, they were really jealous of each other and wanted to be next to Jesus. But so the things that we label cliques automatically, I don't know, are always bad. It's a question of why. Because for some people, there's a little bit of there's a priority here that we can only know so many people so deeply. And so some of it's discipleship, both within I'm going to call it a healthy clique just for the sake of comparison. There's some discipleship within the healthy clique to go, is this a healthy thing? And there's also some discipleship with folks outside of it to go, hey, if you want what they have, like, it's actually, I get why you have a hard time, because we all like to belong, but there's actually a lot of health of what they're doing. So what if we helped you create something similar so you get the benefit of that without having to play the comparison game of like, oh, I just want to be part of that group. Does that make sense? It's such a tight wire act to walk, but and again, from the outside, cliques look bad, but sometimes cliques are just living into this level of priority for one another. But it takes a lot of communication. So if there's anything to expand on that a little bit, talking about this all the time, celebrating healthy community in your ministries, it rhymes so it's cute, but what you celebrate, they will replicate. Haha. But it's really true. Invite people to this. Pray that God would stir in your people, who are really his people, a heart for this, and then celebrate the heck out of it when you see it. And not even when it's happening well. They went and they tried to throw a whole thing for their club. Nobody came. But you know what? They were faithful and tried. What we celebrate gets replicated, yeah.
How would you discern the difference between a healthy and unhealthy?
Yeah, I think a lot of it, again, is what's happening within that. What's the conversation? Do you see growth happening in it? Is it devolving into gossip, small talk, just hanging out all the time. Again, sometimes just hanging out is fine. Like, it's okay to have Christian friends, not always like, again, with our family, we don't always have a purpose, but I think some of it is trying to discern what is happening that is against the things, the fruit of the Spirit and the things of God, and what's happening in the group that are for the fruit of the Spirit and the things of God. Yeah.
Whenever I try to call someone out for gossiping, I'm like, oh, you're providing testimony for someone else right now. You know what I mean? That's what I'll be like. Are you telling someone else's testimony right now?
Yeah.
It's good. Be like,
oh, I should stop. Yeah. Yeah. And then, I mean, there's this whole spiritual side of this that I should have set up at the beginning. What's one of the other things that works against community? Satan, because God loves unity, so Satan hates it. So one of the other barriers is, we have an enemy out there, and we all have a sin nature and this kind of stuff within us as well. But I do think there is a lot of this that goes, even as we think of like, hey, do I need to prioritize depth over width of relationships? Like, there's a lot of prayer that goes into that. Because otherwise I'm going to make a good list or a bad list and burn the bad list kind of stuff. I don't like them, so they're out. But praying like, God, who would you have me prioritize so that we can pursue this level of depth? And who would you bring along to create similar groups, even among people that I would really like to be part of a group with? But turns out they're mature in some ways and should lead their own healthy clique kind of thing. Fair? Okay. This is a lot. It's fast. I'm happy to chat. Emails in the back, that kind of stuff. Also, I'd be remiss if I didn't say a lot of this came from that book that's right there called A Field Guide for Genuine Community. So if you need help taking it and making it more practical, our whole organization's wrapped around helping everyday followers of Jesus live in community and on mission together. Thank you for making this part of your day. I hope lunch is amazing. And Father, would you, again, take this time and just bear more fruit than would be possible outside of your Spirit working. So in every heart, in every household, in every group, ministry, church, city, and to the nations, Lord, would you call and equip your people to the things that you call us and equip us to for your glory. Amen. Y'all have a great afternoon. Thank you.